again, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this Saturday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm Dave Percy, meteorologist with the National Weather Service, and I'll be hosting today's show. Up first, hazardous weather graphic. Red area here, that's the eastern Arctic coast. That's for a blizzard warning that kicks into effect 9 p.m. this evening and continues throughout the night and until 6 p.m. tomorrow afternoon. And that's for, winds expected gusts 40 to 60 miles an hour out of the west, and blowing snow, reduced visibilities to near zero, or could create some whiteout conditions during that time period as a low tracking eastward farther to the north across the Arctic Ocean there tightens that gradient. Already seen winds gusting 30 to 40 miles an hour this afternoon along the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, and those will probably increase tonight and visibilities will drop. And the other area here, this is a winter storm watch that's out for the St. Lawrence Island area, Bering Strait coast, and the Seward Peninsula, Yukon Delta. That kicks into effect Monday afternoon or late Monday afternoon as a storm comes across the Bering Sea and increases wind and snow and blowing snow. And then farther to the east here, the Galena area, Kobuk Valley and Ambler on down into the Yukon Delta, lower Yukon Valley areas. That'll go into effect probably Monday evening or Monday night sometime, but late Monday afternoon out here in the west. Otherwise, no watches, warnings, or advisories anywhere else in the state for now, at least for the moment. Satellite imagery showing kind of another trough here, spinning some moisture up into the southeast interior. Copper River Basin, not really any significant moisture or snowfall, but a little heavier back along the North Gulf Coast areas. 2/3 of an inch at Yakutat falling, for example, today. And then on down the Panhandle, another wet day there. Varying amounts, or the amounts varied as they usually do there. Sitka and Cake picking up about 6/10 of an inch of precipitation, while Sitka had just under an inch, about 9/10 or so, and then Hoonah had 1 1/4 inches. So some areas definitely had more than others, but starting to taper off or become a little more showery, but won't end completely. Southwest flow here carrying disturbances in, and troughs, kind of surges of moisture will continue to roll in. You can see one here right off the coast. That'll be coming in tonight, and that pattern will continue for actually a couple of days as the cold upper low here over the southwest interior, center over the southwest interior here, slowly shifts eastward. Now I'll keep that southwest flow going, but snowfall levels will be coming down, and could see some snow down to pretty low elevations Sunday night and Monday, especially in the northern and central areas. Otherwise, clouds here along the Arctic coast, but light precipitation going on up in that area. On down the east side here, Ambler picked up, or Anahtuvik picked up about 1/2 an inch of snow. So anywhere from a 1/2 inch to an inch fell in the Brooks Range area, and Fort Yukon also had about maybe up to an inch there, but really light amounts through this area. Back to the west, still pretty breezy along the northwest coast today, with Kivalina, Point Hope picking up winds gusting to anywhere as high as 40 miles an hour, and still 45-mile-an-hour wind gusts. St. Lawrence Island, these winds beginning to come down now from the Bering Strait, Wales, Tin City, into Sofunga and Gamble. Still pretty windy today, but they're starting to edge down here during the afternoon today, and they come down 30, 40-mile-an-hour wind gusts, Pribilof Islands and the southwest coast with cold air, snow showers, St. Paul, St. George, and along the coast here, right on down into the Alaska Peninsula. Nelson Lagoon gusts 50 miles an hour out of the west, and that pulling the snowfall levels down to sea level here with snow at Cold Bay and back to the west on Alaska as well, and it tapers off from there into the central Aleutians on out to the west. Still some snow showers going on though around the Shimia and Attu area. On the chart today, here's surface reflection of the upper level low. That's just about right on top of it there. Slowly moving eastward, still a good gradient, not quite as tight as it has been here this afternoon as it was yesterday, but enough to keep those wind gusts going and right into the Alaska Peninsula. Otherwise, kind of a dry slide here from Kodiak Island up into Cook Inlet and the Kenai Peninsula with the more significant rainfall along the North Gulf Coast. We're roughly about 8/10 full at Cordova, and Valdez picked up about another ½ an inch of rain today, as I mentioned, but lighter up in the Copper River Basin and the interior. And areas of snow, definitely cloudy with areas of light snow, snow showers, or just flurries here along the North Slope Brooks Range on out to the Arctic coast. For tonight, again, blizzard warning out for the eastern stretch of the Beaufort Sea coast. Winds gusting 40 to 60 miles an hour out of the west with very low visibilities due to snow and blowing snow. Additional snowfall, maybe 1 to 2 inches. When the wind's like that, it's kind of hard to measure it. But continued a downward trend in the winds here through the Bering Strait coast, especially on the northwest coast through the Bering Strait, St. Lawrence Island. Still breezy, but not terribly breezy here for the Yukon Delta coast areas, as well as the Kuskokwim Delta. And still could see gusts 30 to maybe 40 miles an hour tonight for the Alaska Peninsula with snow and snow showers. And some of that could spread into the Kodiak area. It'd be mostly on the west side of the island. Whatever fell would be quite light. And just a chance of snow showers over the central Aleutians, and still an area of light snow possible here over the Copper River Basin up into the 40-mile country. But again, amounts not expected to be a whole lot, and still rain and snow showers, snowfall levels coming down over the northern central panhandle. So it really depends on your elevation, whether you see snow or rain or a mixture of, but the rainfall rates are going to be dropping off from what they have been. And then for Sunday, yet another trough keeps it unsettled over the panhandle there. Wind's not much of a factor. Wind's not much of a factor over the central and eastern interior as well, but still pretty windy here for the Kodiak Island area, Kamishak Bay, and at least early on for Bristol Bay and the Alaska Peninsula. But this week, ridging shifting eastward, begin to diminish those winds and as well as the snow showers. Otherwise, pretty nice day tomorrow for St. Lawrence Island. Could see some breaks and winds going almost calm. Next big storm pushing into the western Bering here we'll see on Monday. That drives right into the west coast and southwest coast. Snow and blowing snow in advance of the warm front will be lifting across the southwest interior into the Bering Strait with moderate to heavy rain along the front in advance of the front, but very wet and windy for the just about all of the Bering Sea and the Aleutians. High pressure, light winds, dry conditions, still some flurries here over the northeast part of the state on down into possibly Fairbanks area north of the Alaska Range, Delta and Northway, but those amounts will be very light and otherwise high pressure controlling the weather down to the North Gulf Coast. Another low keeps it wet over the panhandle. And for lows tonight, generally either side of zero for the Brooks Range, North Slope, and generally 5 to 10 for the upper Yukon, Kobuk, Koyukuk Valley areas on out to Kotzebue, and single numbers down to the Alaska Range. Lower to mid-20s, south central Alaska and the Susitna Valley with teens. The Copper River Basin, mid to upper 20s for the North Gulf Coast, 30s to near 40 for the Panhandle. Highs tomorrow, upper 30s to lower 40s for the southeast coast, upper 30s Kodiak Island, Alaska Peninsula, lower 40s for the Aleutians, and single numbers and teens over the interior. Lows for Monday morning, anywhere from 6 to or 5 to 10 below for your lows. North Slope, Arctic coast, eastern Arctic coast into the northern interior here, and Tanana Valley mostly in that 5 to 10 degree range with cooler now. Teens, lower to mid-teens, south central Alaska, Susitna Valley, Matanuska Valley, a little below zero for the Copper River Basin, followed by highs barely above zero in some areas.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
First line weather graphic here for Sunday morning. A lot of VFR out here over the Bering Sea, Aleutians into the Pribilofs and St. Lawrence Island, but marginal VFR, just a narrow band here from Nunivak Island, catching part of the Yukon Delta coast through the Bering Strait, and then areas of IFR up along the North Slope and the Arctic coast, areas of VFR in the central and northeast interior, as well as back along the west coast there in the Seward Peninsula, Kotzebue Sound. Some IFR here in the lower Yukon River Valley and some of that in the Kuskokwim Valley, with some marginal VFR slipping on down toward Iliamna Lake. Otherwise, basically VFR tomorrow here for areas east of, or from say the northern Alaska range here, northwest part there around Rainy Pass, Puntilla, into Cook Inlet, Prince William Sound, some IFR lingering up over the eastern Alaska Range area right here and either side of the mountain range. And not too bad for the Panhandle, areas of VFR with areas of marginal VFR. For the afternoon, go back to the IFR here over toward the eastern border, otherwise marginal for the southeast coast. Marginal VFR, Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound, and the North Gulf Coast. Northward there to western Copper River Basin, Talkeetnas, on up to IFR over the eastern interior, then some VFR, another swath of IFR here in the central interior, back to mostly VFR along the west coast, all the way down to Bristol Bay, and all the way northward there to Kivlina, and some IFR western Arctic coast. VFR, mostly VFR from Adak over to Unalaska, and looks like a little bit of marginal stuff slips into the Pribilofs, and IFR with the next system out over the western Bering Sea takes a pretty good jog to the east by Monday morning here, spreading to St. Matthew Island, almost to the Pribilofs, and some of that dragging into the western Aleutians. Mostly VFR for the interior, but some areas of IFR, especially for the north, or marginal VFR, especially for the north slope. But the Arctic coast looking VFR, and the Panhandle, mostly marginal for the afternoon. Mostly VFR here for Monday afternoon. Across much of the central eastern interior, north slope, Arctic coast looking good. All the way down south central Alaska, North Gulf Coast, Kodiak Island, marginal on the southern island, Fognak Island VFR, and marginal VFR here into the Panhandle. Out west, IFR sliding on in on westerly flow, a lot of moisture here into the Yukon Delta coast, back up to St. Lawrence Island, marginal VFR, central Bering Sea, the narrow swath of VFR right through there. Passes, Anatuvik, marginal VFR to start, becoming VFR in the afternoon. That same forecast good for Adigan. Lake Clark and Merrill, marginal VFR at times tomorrow or most of the time. But rainy, looks like it'll be VFR there for that pass. And for windy, starting out IFR, slowly becoming marginal and toward the afternoon. Gradual improvement, whether it starts out IFR or marginal. The afternoon will be better than the morning, but Isabel looks like it'll be IFR the entire day at times. And then mostly marginal from Antasta, Tanita, IFR becoming VFR, and Portage, VFR the entire day. Chilkoot and White, marginal to start, and lower conditions in the afternoon, possibly IFR. For the freezing levels at the surface, across the Bering Sea to the Pribilofs into Bristol Bay, hugging the coastline across the northern Panhandle, 2,000 feet now, down to Dixon Entrance, and off the chart here out west. Icing, a pretty good batch of moisture coming in, so areas of considerable moderate entering the Shimiat 2 area in the far western Bering Sea, and then that's going to be sliding east-northeast 24 hours after that, or less than 24 hours, or into Monday it'll be coming on shore to the coast. Otherwise, some leftover areas of light mixed rime icing here over the eastern interior, not that significant. And also over the southeast coast, southwest flow keeps those surges of moisture rolling on in. And for the jet stream here, you can see west-southwest flow, trough cutting across center, coming over south central Alaska tomorrow, the cold upper low. And for 9,000 feet, more of a trough swinging by with southwest flow, 25 knots into the Panhandle. 15 here over the eastern interior, 25 eastern Arctic coast, 25 to 35 to as high as 50 knots there across Kodiak Island. And 3,000 feet, 45 knot winds Kodiak, lighter over the interior. Out west, increasing to 45 over the far western Aleutians. Occasional moderate choppier Kodiak Island, Shelikof Strait in the western Aleutians.
Hello again, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. And joining us again, talking about the augmented reality sandbox, is Eric Stevens from GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska. And he's actually talking about a project from AKwx, which is the experimental program to stimulate competitive research. A lot of acronyms, but some really fun stuff today, right, Eric?
You bet. We've got a learning tool that is a tool that's fun to use, and it really has a relevance to actually daily lives of anyone who goes outside and sees lumpy topography in Alaska. We've got a lot of mountains and such. You know, when I was younger and go on your first hike in the hills, say, you're given, maybe you're in the Boy Scouts or you get at the kiosk at the trailhead, a topographic map, a flat piece of paper with all these lines on it, bullseyes, long lines that curve back on themselves, say, perhaps things that look like this, a quadrangle or a topographic map. We've got here just to illustrate a couple of examples near Denali. Alaska has so much topography, so many mountains. And what are all these lines that we see? It can be tough to know what this means the first time you look at it. What we've got, all these lines represent lines of where the elevation of the topography goes through a certain level above sea level, say that this line represents where the mountains have gone from below 1,000 feet, mean sea level, up through 1,000 feet and above. That's your 1,000-foot contour. And when the mountain keeps going up, you're up to 1,200 feet, 1,400 feet, and so on. And that's how you get this little bullseye around the peak of a mountain.
Kind of makes layered slices, right?
Kind of like layered slices. Nice way to look at that. And when you see the lines are closer together, you're going up more steeply. If the mountain rises more slowly, it takes you longer in horizontal space to go through those different vertical increments. So
that is really hard to visualize.
Right. Imagine you're looking at a 2D piece of paper, two-dimensional piece of paper, but you're trying to understand what the three-dimensional world looks like. Well, enter the augmented reality sandbox. Yes, what is that? It is right here. We have the sandbox with us today, Sandbox 2.0, portable version.
Sweet.
Built up at University of Alaska Fairbanks. And we've got a couple of folks helping out today.
Let's see, Alana Valaji, and she's a mechanical engineering student from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. If you want to give us a thumbs up there, Alana, thanks for helping us out today. And Courtney Breest, she's the outreach coordinator from AKwx, also helping us out today. Thanks, Courtney.
And this tool here has a Microsoft Kinect to sense the level of sand in this sandbox. And then the Kinect feeds its information into a computer that then sends a signal to a projector to draw the appropriate topographic lines on this topography. The fun thing about this, as we can see here, is that the sandbox and its Kinect and its projector, they all work as a team. So here we've got a mountain in the middle of the sandbox. What if we took down the mountain to some degree? Watch as the software responds and redraws the topography.
Kind of a caldera forming there.
There you go, And what's fun about the sandbox too is it knows that gravity flows downhill, and we've got some water that's actually down in the lowest elevations. And what's happening now is we're making it rain a little bit. We'll fill up rain into that elevated lake bed, that caldera, as you said. And so now water is pooled up there. And what if you gouged out an outlet channel?
Glacial dam release.
There you go. The water flows out. What we're seeing here is a tool that allows people to touch and connect, Microsoft Connect, RRR, to connect two-dimensional topographic maps like what we have here, these flat things on a piece of paper, to the real three-dimensional world. I think this sandbox's real particular application as a learning tool to young people is, what does a two-dimensional map mean when it's trying to represent the three-dimensional world? This sandbox is kind of both at once. It's actually three-dimensional, lumpy topography there, the sand, but it's got these lines drawn on the three-dimensional sand that would be on a two-dimensional piece of paper.
Wow, that is a huge leap from the learning that we experienced when we were younger to how children and even adults are visualizing in these new forms of technology. Allows that to kind of reshape their thinking and visualize this in a very useful and absolutely hands-on way. It's amazing.
It's a hands-on tool, and
it's hard for me to sit here and not go play with that.
Well, that's what happened at GINA, up at the University of Alaska in Fairbanks, when the first model was being made, the prototype with plywood and such. We had professional adult professor types had heard about this, and they came by because they wanted to see how it worked.
Okay.
And everyone becomes that idealistic, wonder-filled youngster.
Sure.
And you just can't help but play with that, and to see how it reacts in time, and
Right.
it's a dynamic learning tool, and it
Dynamic,
responds.
That's exactly the word.
And
Yeah.
you wonder what applicabilities beyond a teaching
Right.
tool for
Where does it
topography
go?
can it have. You can see how in Alaska we have inundation mapping is an issue. If you had water slosh inland, say in a coastal flooding event on the western coast of Alaska or the Arctic coast, you could see this. The concept is illustrated here as an introductory learning method. I think this is a potentially good outreach tool for all of us in Alaska.
Okay, so not only just a topographical sense, a mapping sense, maybe something that leads into understanding of how geographic information systems work with GIS, but also geology, if we wanted to get into kind of the formations and the bigger land masses and the representation of the 2D map. We could go into hydrology, which is very important in Alaska, of course. And even just understanding weather sense. Mounding up a big pile of sand could be that Arctic high pressure system sitting on top of Fairbanks, and the voids would be low pressure systems. This can go a lot of different directions.
Yes, exactly. It's not just landforms, but pressure has contours of high pressure and low pressure. And I wish I had had this kind of a learning tool when I was taking Meteorology 101 back 25 years ago.
Wow.
Would have been helpful, I think.
Probably would have gotten a better grade, yeah. Okay, thank you so much for coming by, Eric, and Alana and Courtney, thank you so much for your help there in the sandbox. We are going to play in the sandbox a little bit more coming up tomorrow on our next edition of Alaska Weather Facts. We hope you join us for that. In the meantime, make sure you go to alaska.edu/EPSCOR. That's alaska.edu EPSCOR to learn more information about what we're doing with this augmented reality sandbox around Alaska. We'll see you next time on Alaska Weather Facts.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Looking at today's sea ice analysis. Still continuing to see growth here all along the west coast, and that'll continue for about another day until on Monday, and that big storm comes in, winds turn west-southwest, so especially the thin ice, that's going to get blown back east and north and melt as well. So moving on to the coastal water forecast for the southeast coast, we've got small craft advisory winds for westerly direction here at 25 knots, 17 to 18 foot seas. West 20 on the north coast. Lynn Canal, south 25, gusts 40 knots tomorrow. Much lighter for Stevens Passage and Clarence Strait, south-southeast at 15 with 3 foot seas for Stevens Passage, 7 feet for Clarence Strait. And for Monday, north winds 20 knots for Lynn Canal, southeast 20 for Stevens Passage, and southeast 20 with gale force gusts coming into Clarence Strait there, gusts up to 35 knots, but seas at 4 feet. West winds 25 knots continue here for much of the coastline for small craft advisories with 15 to 16 foot seas, southeast 20 on the north coast. Prince William Sound, light northeast winds at 10 knots tomorrow, light north winds at 10 knots for northern Cook Inlet, but southern Cook Inlet, northwest at 30, and then west 40 knots in the forecast here for the Kamishak Bay, 35 knots out of the west for the Barren Islands, and west 30 knots for the western North Gulf Coast. Turn southwest, you get over toward Middleton Island, drop up to about 25 knots. And then for Monday, northwest winds 20 knots here for Prince William Sound, and that continues right out into the eastern North Gulf Coast at 20 knots, but seas will be up to 11 feet there. Small craft advisories for the western North Gulf Coast with those 25 knot winds, and northwest 40 for the Barren Islands. 15 foot seas, gales continue for Kamishak Bay out of the northwest, northwest 20, southern Cook Inlet, north of the Forelands, light northerlies. And for Bristol Bay, northwest 30 knots tomorrow, west winds at 30 knots across the Alaska Peninsula, seas 12 to 13 feet. In fact, 30 knot winds up to Sitkinak, west 30 knots, Shelikof Strait, gales out of the west for the east side of Kodiak Island. Moving ahead to Monday, we'll see these winds edge under the gale threshold there for the east side of Kodiak, staying west of 30 knots, southwest 20, Shelikof Strait, west 20, Sitkinak to Castle Cape, and the Alaska Peninsula small craft advisory, southwest winds 25 to 30 knots, southwest 25 there for Bristol Bay, seas running 6 to 8 feet. And for the western Aleutians tomorrow, winds coming up, good gales, 40 knots out of the southwest as that next storm system, or actually the frontal system, moves into the area there, and southwest coming up to 20 to 30 knots for Adak and Atka. Otherwise, Fox Islands west winds 15 to 25 knots with seas running 9 to 10 feet, or 8 to 10 feet. And then for Monday, Fox Islands, 25 to 40 knot winds here, strongest over toward Nikolsky, all out of the southwest with seas running anywhere from 12 to 14 feet on the Bering Sea side of the islands. Good gales here coming in the central Aleutians, southwest 40 to 45 knots, seas building to 17 feet, and then storm warnings, areas from Adak, west of Adak all the way out to Shimei and Attu, and those southwest winds sustained 50 knots, seas around 25 feet. Southwest coast tomorrow, small craft advisories, northwesterlies, 25 to 30 knots here, seas 8 to 10 feet. Small craft advisories also out for northwest winds of 25 knots, St. Lawrence Island, Norton Sound, northwest 30, St. Matthew Island, lighter winds for the Pribilof, southwest of 20. And for Monday, gales everywhere here, southwest 45 for the Pribilof, south 40 knots, north side, or the Yukon Delta coast, St. Matthew Island, southwest 40 into Kuskokwim Bay. Southeast 40 knots for St. Lawrence Island and 35 out of the southeast for Norton Sound. Eastern Beaufort Sea coast tomorrow, winds coming down in the afternoon, 20 to 30 knots here on the east side, north 20, central coast 15 on the west side, and 20 to 25 knot northerlies there from Cape Beaufort on down to Wales. Next day on Monday, southeast 30 knots from Wales up to Cape Thompson, 25 knot winds to Cape Beaufort, then south 20 on the west side, central coast south 15, westerlies 10 to 15 for the eastern stretch of the coast. For tonight, lingering snow eastern interior, but all these amounts pretty light. Blizzard warning eastern Beaufort Sea coast. More showery conditions for the panhandle, and winds diminishing here along the west coast tomorrow with fairly dry conditions, still some flurries and snow showers scattered around. Big storm coming into the Bering Seas, got winter storm watches out here for the western interior.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.